We have a community today where outwardly we're Muslim, but inwardly when we're with our wives are we Muslim? When we're with our parents are we Muslim? When we're alone and we've got the TV screen and the internet and the curtains are closed, are we Muslim? When the Fajr prayer in the morning and the alarm clock goes on, are we Muslim? With the way we deal with people, are we Muslim? Are we Mu'mins? The way, do we cheat? Do we lie? Do we backbite? Are we Mu'mineen? You know, these are the things of the Quran that we claim we believe. But I want you to ask the question tonight, and I want myself to ask that question. I want you to ask it with me. Do we really believe? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most kind. Firstly, just an apology. I was actually cycling, and so I'm in my cycling clothes actually, and I grabbed an old blazer at work, and I put that on so I don't look like I'm a security guard. And brother Osman said, look, Imam Siraj is unfortunately she can't make it. Can you? I said, I'm not a very good stand-in for Imam Siraj. But he said, no, please, because so I, my apologies for the attire, for my cycling attire. I've heard what Brother John has been saying, and Jazakallah khair to him. I also saw the poster, superheroes, and a few things come to my mind. And of course, the title of the talk is Forbidding Evil, Commanding the Good and Forbidding Evil. What I wanted to kind of just say to you firstly is, I wanted to remind you of these verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in one of the very last chapters of the Quran, وَالْعَصْرِ أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. So these are verses that we all know. This is one of the shortest surahs of the Quran, one of the shortest chapters of the Quran. And it's a very, very deep chapter of the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and He swears by time, He takes an oath by time. He says, by time, indeed all of us were in loss. I'm in loss, you're in loss, everybody we know is in loss, in a state of loss. We're losing out. Except people who have four conditions, four qualities. And I wanted to just delve in slightly into each quality. And the first one is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And the reason I'm picking these verses is because I think it relates a lot to the title, Commanding the Good and Forbidding the Evil, because later on the surah says وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. And those people who command, or who exhort one another, who advise one another, who talk to one another about what is true, about what is right. So I'm going to come on to that. But before that, this first quality, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who believe. And you know, brothers and sisters, today, one of our big problems is that we claim we believe. But I want you to ask the question tonight, and I want myself to ask that question. I want you to ask it with me. Do we really believe? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who believe. Look at the story. Let me bring Ibrahim alayhi salam into the story. Ibrahim alayhi salam is a young child. He's a young man. And he says to his people, this is my God. The stars are my God. And then he says no. And then he says the moon is my God. And he says no. And then he says the sun is my God. And then when the sun sets, he says an amazing word. He says, إِنِّي لَا أُحِبُّ الْآفِلِينَ. Indeed, I do not love those things which set. I don't love things which set. Now if you really think about it, and this was Iman from Ibrahim. Ibrahim, imagine the Prophet ﷺ is commanded to follow Ibrahim. The Prophet is commanded to follow. اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. follow his millah, his way. Hanifa. Ibrahim says, I don't love anything which sets. What he's saying is basically, I only love God. Why? Because everything else sets. And it's as if Ibrahim walks on this earth and he sees everything decaying. He sees everything setting. He sees people's lives setting. He sees them passing away. He sees these beautiful, green, luscious plants and trees, and he sees these things decaying. So this was really the start of Ibrahim's journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where he basically renounced everything else. And this is the meaning of Hanifa. The meaning of Hanif in the Arabic language means to turn away from everything else. So let us ask this question. In our hearts, do we find other things apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes or no? Are our hearts pulled, attracted to many other things? Is it divided? Are our hearts divided between many things apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes or no? So this really, this إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, those who believe. This is really important, that we become people. Just imagine, there are companions around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Quran says to them, don't say you believed. قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. The Bedouins, and these people became Muslim, that we have believed. Companions, they've seen the Prophet, they've accepted his message. قَالَتِ الْأَعْرَابُ آمَنَّا. They said that we believed. And the Quran says, don't say that you believed. وَلَكِنْ قُولُوا أَسْلَمْنَا. But say that you merely accepted, you merely submitted. You haven't reached Iman yet. So this is really one thing that we've all got. Iman comes when you really think, when you use your mind like Ibrahim, and you become a Muslim out of choice. You become a believer out of, not because you've been born as a believer. Today, our religion has become a religion of identity. It's become a religion of the cloth. It's become a religion of affiliation. It's become a religion of belonging. It's become a culture, not an iman. The Quran doesn't talk about culture. The Quran doesn't talk about identity. It doesn't talk about belonging. It talks about iman. It talks about iman, where you are able and you're ready to become like Ibrahim. And his father says, if you don't stop what you're going to do, what you're doing, then I'm going to stone you. And then he says, Inni muhajirun ila rabbi sayahdin. I'm leaving everything. So this really is this iman. We don't have time to go into it. This really is the first quality. And I want to say this, because before we come on to commanding the good and forbidding the evil, and you get this from the order of the verses of Surah Al-Asr anyway, before we even talk about forbidding the evil, then we need to forbid the evil in our hearts. We need to forbid the evil within ourselves. And this is why the scholars say that before the hijrah, the physical hijrah, many of us talk about, I want to make hijrah to Saudi, I want to make hijrah to this place because I want to hear the adhan. This is what people mostly say. Is there an internal hijrah or not? And this is what the Prophet exactly said. He said, Al-muhajiru man hajara ma nahallahu anhu. Man hajara ma nahallahu anhu. The muhajir, the migrant or the emigrant or the one who makes immigration or emigration is the one who does this internal emigration. This is what iman is. So this is very important. When we talk about commanding the good and forbidding the evil, we have to command the good and forbid the evil in ourselves. That's very important. And the next thing then, after we have real iman, not an iman of birth, not an iman of Pakistan, not an iman of Bangladesh or an iman of Sudan or an iman of Egypt, an iman of the Quran. An iman of the Quran, where we take what the Quran says and we don't bring our preconceived ideas. We were taught to be, we go to a certain mosque and we bring that understanding. So we're coloring the Quran already. We're from, we have the problem today, one of the problems today is that we have groups. And you know why we have groups? Is because we don't submit to the Quran. So we submit to ways of understanding Islam that other people have told us. So we come to Allah through people. It's a bit like Christianity. We have intermediaries. We don't go to the Quran. Quran says, come to me directly. Allah says, come to me directly. But we go through Allah through madaris, through certain ways of, through akabir, through. I'm not saying we don't need scholars. We need scholars, right? But for guidance you need the Quran. The Quran doesn't say, go, if you don't know, then ask the scholars. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. But for guidance, you need the Quran, you need taqwa, you need piety. This is very, very important because today, in the past, we never had Salafis and Sufis and Ikhwanis and Deobandis and Tabligis. We never had this. We never had this. We had everybody was because everybody used to take from the Quran. And I want to say this is part of our Iman, where we forgo, where we give up and we migrate from other things, people's understanding of Islam, and we come to the Quran and we submit and we go to the Quran as the Prophet was. The Prophet was ummi, he was unlettered, he was illiterate. We need to go to the Quran illiterate people, not bringing in our philosophies, our theologies, our madhahib, our ways of thinking. We need to put that aside. And if the Quran corroborates, then fine. Not to find in the Quran what we want to prove. So this is really, really, really important. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. When we start to come to the Quran, then we become people who have Iman in our lives. We need Iman in our lives. Today, you look at the Muslim community, if you go to I've been asked to give khutbahs in the prisons, and if you speak to people who work in prisons, 15 to 20% of our Muslim community, of the prison community is Muslim. Can you imagine that? We're 2 to 3% of the community in this country, and 15 to 20%, most people don't, one of the things we see, and we all get happy when people come to Islam, when converts come to Islam, don't we? We all say Allahu Akbar Takbir, and we go and hug them in the mosques. I want to ask a question. Where are they in the mosques? Where are the converts in the mosques? Do we see the converts in the Fajr prayer? You attend the mosque. Do we see them? Why? Because there is also something that is happening that is very, very serious. Many of these converts are leaving Islam. They are leaving. Why? Because we don't believe. Somebody recently told me, he's a cricketer and he captained Manchester. And he said in Zimam al-Haq, and a few of the Pakistani players who became practicing, they called some of the Australian players to their house. And they were doing dawah. They were calling them to Islam. And these Australian players said, what a beautiful religion. What an amazing religion you're talking about. And then in Zimam al-Haq and the rest of them, they walked them back to their hotel. So they walked them back to the hotel. And one of the Australian players says, you've told us about your religion, but where are the followers? This was in Pakistan. Where are the followers? I can't see them. The people that you've talked about, I can't see. And this is the problem. We have a community today where outwardly we're Muslim, but inwardly when we're with our wives, are we Muslim? When we're with our parents, are we Muslim? When we're alone and we've got the TV screen and the internet and the curtains are closed, are we Muslim? When the Fajr prayer in the morning and the alarm clock goes on, are we Muslim? With the way we deal with people, are we Muslim? Are we mu'mins? Do we cheat? Do we lie? Do we backbite? Are we mu'mineen? These are the things of the Quran. The Quran doesn't talk about Deobandi Islam, Tablighi Islam, Ikhwani. It doesn't do that. It doesn't talk about Islamic State. The Quran doesn't do that. The Quran talks about piety. And that piety comes from within. So this is very, very important. So Iman. And then I want to very quickly, because we don't have time, I'll finish in a few minutes because I know you need to go to the next talk. Al-amal salih. This is the second thing mentioned in Surah Al-Asr. So just remember what I said about. I wanted to say these converts. I forgot to finish my point. These converts, what is happening is that they're coming into contact with us, and they're getting put off. And many of them are leaving Islam as well. And because many of them are not supported, we do a hug in a mosque, and then that's it, finished, no more contact. They're alone, they're ostracized by their families. We have nothing to do with them because we have lost belief. We have an Islam of culture, we don't have an Islam of the Quran. So these are conditions for commanding the good and forbidding the evil. Islam now, this is Islam. Al-amal salih, when the Quran keeps on talking about righteous deeds, it means Islam. And again, Islam of the Quran, not our Islam, not my name is Abdullah, so I'm a Muslim. My name is Aisha, so I'm a Muslim. This is not the Quran. This is not the Islam of the Quran. The Islam of the Quran is different. The Islam of the Quran is like Ibrahim again. We see it from Ibrahim again. We see that he was commanded, the people of the earth, they were settling their families on the banks of the Nile and the Euphrates. Ibrahim is asked to settle his family in a dry, arid, barren desert. Nobody there, nothing. And he leaves his wife and his baby child in the desert and he walks away. Why? Because Allah said so. And he's asked to sacrifice Ismail. Can imagine, just imagine a young child. So if some of you have children, imagine young brothers and sisters. Imagine taking the knife and the soft skin, you place it on and you actually start to move it. Imagine that. Imagine what that must be to feel like. But he does it because we replaced it with a great sacrifice. This is the Islam we need. Islam is basically, if I'm going to sum up Islam in one or two sentences, it's this. It is whenever you are faced with a choice in your life or two choices in your life, and we're faced with many in our daily lives, you stop and you think for a second and you ask yourself, what does my Lord want from me? And then you ask Allah, you call to Him, Oh Allah, Oh my Lord, my Rabb, what do you want from me? And then you do that. No matter what you think the consequences are, you do that. That is Islam. That is Islam. That is very. So these are conditions for commanding the good and forbidding. And then the third one, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. This is when it comes to commanding the good and forbidding the evil and becoming patient on this. And so, this commanding the good and forbidding, this is a very, very important part too. Because the Quran says, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ وَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ. The Quran says, you are the best of nations. You are the best of nations. So we have a mission. We have a goal. We have, if you want to use this word, and I said I don't like using this word, but I'm going to use it. If there is an identity, then this is it. We are people who call to the good, and we are people who warn people from the evil. And the greatest evil is the fire of hell. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, often we talk about commanding the good and forbidding the evil. We got to command the good against alcohol. We got to forbid the evil of all of these other things that we see in society. But Aisha said in a Sahih Hadith, she said, if the first verses of the Quran, she said the first verses of the Quran that came down were the verses of paradise and hell. Paradise and hell. And if the first verses to come down were لا تشربوا الخمر ولا تزنوا, don't drink alcohol and don't do zina, don't do adultery, don't fornicate, then they would have never left. They would never have followed the Prophet ﷺ. This is Aisha, the mother of the believers, saying this. So the first thing we call to people is belief in the afterlife. And this is why the Quran says what? Ya ayyuhal muddathir qum fa'anzir. Oh, you wrapped up in your garments, meaning the Prophet when he was shivering. Qum fa'anzir. Stand up, arise and warn. Warn people, not laws, because that comes later. But warn people of the fire of hell. I'll finish with this. We should really be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first word in the Quran is what? Alhamd, gratitude. Just imagine that this religion is not based on fear. This religion is based on gratitude. This religion is a religion of gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Rabb. And this is why the Prophet said, أَفَلَا أَكُونُ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. When they said to the Prophet of Allah, why do you stand at night so long until your feet swell, praying to Allah? All your sins are being forgiven. And he said, shall I not be a grateful slave? So we see this religion is about gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has given us this. Allah has given us this beautiful gift. This beautiful gift of belief. How ungrateful to Allah would we be if we kept it to ourselves and didn't command people and forbid the evil, call people to their salvation, and call people away from the fire of hell, and call people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we really have to become a community, I'll repeat, of Iman first, and then Islam second. And Iman, real Iman Islam. Not cultural Iman in Islam. Not external when we're with our friends. We're very, very nice, but at home, with our mothers and our wives and our children, we're nothing. We're nothing. And then a community that calls people, warns people against the fire of hell. Our neighbors, have they heard the message or not? Have we warned them or not? And there are many, many ways. There is an important discussion as to how you go about doing da'wah, but that's for maybe another topic. But inshallah, if we bear these things in mind, then these are the real superheroes. Really, these are the real. So I'm really, honestly, when we come to this, then all this political problem that we think we're having in the world, we're talking about Arab Spring and Syria, and all of these things which are happening. But do we really, really do anything which might change that? Do we really? Allah says, no, there's a verse in the Quran which is very clear. وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ Look at this. Allah has promised you, if you believe and do good deeds. But these two conditions need to be there. لا يستخلفنهم في الأرض. That He will give them khilafah in the earth. You know, we all talk about Izzah and Allah Mu'azzan Islam and Muslimin in our every prayer, every tarawih. Allah Mu'azzan Islam, but we have no Izzah in our homes. So before we protest about the disrespect of the Prophet, we need to respect the Prophet in our lives. We are the first people that disrespect the Prophets. The Prophet of Allah. We need to respect him. We need to respect him. And then other people will come to us and they will run to Islam. They will beg us to teach them. We need to show people Islam, not to make people hear Islam. We need to show them. And I'll finish off with a story. I had a few other things to say, but I'll finish off. I'll finish off with this story. A beautiful story that there was a man, a Polish, I think, convert. He said he was traveling in Turkey and he got lost. He got lost and he ended up in a village. It was very dark. He was with his wife. And he was walking and, he saw a person wrapped up, walking through the village. And he went up to him and he goes, can you guide me? Can you lead me on the way? I need a hotel. And the man said, come with me. So he was a bit afraid, he didn't know his path. So he went with him anyway. So this man, he took him to his home. And he got home and they sat down and the man fed him. He said, and this Polish man said, it made me feel very comfortable. And he said, after everything, after serving me, made me feel very comfortable. My wife too. He said, you stay here and I'm going to the other room. I said, okay, I'll sleep here for the night. You stay here for the night, I'll go to the other room. So he said he slept. In the morning he woke up and now obviously he can see everything. And he said, I went out to the door. He said, I went out to the door. And he said, when I looked, there was no other room. There was no other room. He said, I looked under a tree. Him and his wife and his children were shivering under a blanket under the tree. Shivering. They'd been there the whole night. And he goes up to him and said, are you crazy? Are you crazy? He stands up, he says, no, I'm not crazy. I'm a Muslim. This is my religion. I'm not crazy. And he said, I looked at my wife and her tears were falling from her cheeks. She was crying, she was weeping. And he said, I became a Muslim. And this man now is setting up Islamic centers all across the world. All across the world. I think he was Polish. He was setting up these centers all across the world. Imagine, this is what Islam can do. The Prophet ﷺ became a Muslim and then he showed people what Islam was. So before we show people Islam, we need to really seriously think whether we are people of the Quran or not. And if we're not, we need to go away and learn our religion, become Muslims, and then people of this country will run to us.